been attending our lecture series for a long period of time. But this is a very unique one in a way that we're talking about responsibility of a consumer. And we've had different kinds of talks in the past, some talking about conservation, some talking about art, some talking about maybe heritage and mythology as well. So you had a diverse approach towards looking at nature and conservation. And I'll invite my colleague Rahul Palekar to introduce the speaker of the day. Rahul, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Uh, our speaker today is Mayuresh Gangal, who is co-founder of Know Your Fish initiative and alumnus and research scholar in Oceans and Coast Program, Nature Conservation Foundation. He is currently pursuing a PhD in understanding the impacts of overfishing on fish populations on the west coast of India. He is also working in the Lakshadweep archipelago, documenting traditional fishing practices and how they change over time. I would also like to give a little intro to Know Your Fish. So, Know Your Fish, also abbreviated as KYF, is a voluntary initiative that works towards an ocean friendly lifestyle. They encourage and empower consumers to eat seafood responsibly. They do this by providing informed choices that are based on a compilation of decades of marine research. With this, I would like to invite Mayuresh Gangal to begin the talk for the August chapter.
Hi, thank you, Rahul. Am I audible?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay. So today the talk would be very, very brief. I would hope that it will stir up a lot of discussion, and I'm really looking forward for lots and lots of discussion. So very happy to be here with you all today. Let's start. You all must have some idea about what the talk is about, and the talk is about how to eat seafood responsibly, or whether we can eat seafood responsibly, and so on. And other thing is, the question is why to eat seafood responsibly is to deal with the problem that we have in hand, overfishing. But let me give you first some very brief idea about what overfishing means. And because different people, there are different definitions of overfishing, sustainability, etc., etc. So let's at least go through them and see what we are talking about. So I'll start my presentation. So for example, there are so many fish in the water, and after a year, their population increases. Suppose there are 100 fish in the water, and after a year, their population increases to 110. Now, if your fishing boat is just catching that surplus 10, what you have, then what you have at the end is again the 100 fish in the water. And this is what ideally, this is what the ideal definition of sustainable fishing. When you just take the increment from the resource pool that you have. However, when you have 100 fish in the water and in years' time they become 110, and your fishing effort takes more than 10, then what happens is at the end of the day, you are left with the less fish than what you have started with. And this is like this is typical in decline in population, and this is what we call a overfishing. So what this is sustainable fishing, where you are just taking the increment or even the less. Now, technically, what I have shown here is something what they call fully exploited. That means the entire increment is completely taken, but the fishing effort can go even lesser. And what I'm showing here is overfishing. Basically, you are taking more than the population increment naturally is. Now, this is very simplistic definition. I know there are a lot of nuances. We have multi-species fisheries, trophic chains, so on and so on. But this is the simplest thing to understand, and that's why I have towards forward here. So what we have seen in world fisheries so far is, so this is 1950. As you go, this x-axis is a time, and this is now, and this is the amount of total fish in the ocean, what they call fish stocks. Okay, and what you can see is in 1950s there are lots and lots of stocks, more than 80% of the stocks which were uh, kind of underexploited. That means we were catching less than what increment in the kind of population. Whereas what we have today is more than 60% of the stocks are either overexploited or crashed. Crashed means the population goes to so low that it can't reach back to its original population, and that is typical in case of um, long sustained industrial kind of fishing efforts. So what we would do in such kind of scenario? So there are different players trying their best to do what we can, and there are different ways by which one can tackle this overfishing issue. One is complete closure or marine protected areas. So, for example, I have put a map of Mahatma Gandhi Marine Protected Area here, and this is, I mean, this is the simplest and simplest to understand kind of a regulation where you just say that nobody can fish and hope that fish in those waters remain there, and that they and their stock can replenish over time. Second thing that is getting more and more popular these days is something called as floating reserves. So this is the floating reserve, the map of a floating reserve of Bitra. So this is a small island in Bitra in Lakshadweep, and this is a reef around it. Now, this reef had a typical population of groupers who used to come together at one particular place on new moon nights, the Amavasya nights, for breeding. And because it was so spatially and temporally predictable, people started fishing in that time. So some of my colleagues were worried about this fact, and they thought, what can be done about this? And one way to tackle it, they thought of, is if we can just give kind of a fishing rest for the entire reef, not in the lagoon, not outside in the open ocean, but just for the reef for 8 days, 4 days before and 4 days after new moon, then that would suffice in terms of giving some kind of a rest to this breeding population. And this kind of a system is typically called a floating reserve. It was proposed to the local panchayat. Local panchayat also agreed to it, and at the moment it is functioning like a floating reserve. So this is another way that people have kind of explored to tackle this overfishing issue. Third thing is a technological solution. We know that trawling is a big problem for fisheries, because it's a kind of a method which takes everything that comes into its path. It catches all the fish, most of it which is unwanted, and very small fish, juvenile fish, which otherwise we wouldn't eat, but it gets caught in the trawling and then dies. So people have thought of having a technological solution in terms of what they call a bycatch reduction device. So bycatch is essentially means unwanted catch, and people have thought whether we can modify the trawl net itself so that the bycatch can escape from the net and so on. And so these are some kind of a technological solutions people have thought of. So at the moment we have seen regulations in terms of policies, regulation in terms of technology, and so on. But most of these regulations are kind of, when you see fisheries as a business, they're kind of addressing supply side of fisheries, that having marine protected areas, having partial closures, having gear modifications, and so on. But many people who are working with fisheries, who are worried about overfishing, etc., were thinking whether solutions can be thought from the demand side as well. And one of the main concern is since fishing is so complex, whether the demand would have any impact for that matter on fish catches per se. And let me illustrate with how demand can have an impact with a simple example. I hope majority of the participants today are from Mumbai, and I mean, all of people who know something about seafood in India know that pomfret is very, very cherished and kind of important. I mean, important fish when it comes to seafood consumption. Now, the price of pomfret in Mumbai market can fluctuate from 200 to 1,000, and the question is when this price kind of fluctuates. And if you now this is a schematic representation of how the price fluctuates. It kind of have this pattern. The pomfret in Mumbai shows its lowest price in July and August and highest price in December. Now, actually, July and August, there is a fishing ban and people can't go for fishing. So the normal economic rationale says that if there is a less demand or less supply, then the price is higher because the demand is really more, and it should be even more prominent in a very highly seeked fish like pomfret. However, still in July and August, you see a dip in its prices, and the main reason is the month of Shravan and Ganesh Chaturthi. Lots of Hindus won't prefer to eat any meat during this time, and as a result, even if you catch pomfret, there is very unlike. I mean, there is a very limited market as far as Mumbai is concerned. And in such case, fishermen don't even prefer to go out in sea and catch pomfret and land it per se, or they prefer to do it in a less quantities. So in certain sense, it's a consumer choices or consumer will. It's kind of uh, driving this fisherman behavior in certain sense. The opposite you can see in the month of December and January, mainly New Year and Christmas time. So this is a time when everyone is in a party mood. Everyone wants to have the best of the best that things, I mean, the nature could offer, and pomfret is one of them. So during this December and January, people especially go to catch pomfrets. The prices go sky high. Now this is just a cartoon representation. What I'm trying to say is we as a consumers can not just we can exert some kind of pressure when it comes to the production, but we are already exerting some kind of pressure when it comes to production. Especially in Mumbai market, you can even see on a day-to-day basis within a week. So within a week, if you see how the pomfret price or any fish price fluctuates, you see on Mondays and Thursdays the average fish price is less. And because again the Hindus don't prefer to eat meat in Mumbai during Mondays and Thursdays, and again there is no value for this for fish, the price reduces. Whereas on Sundays it becomes very high. Saturday, Sunday, again people have time, people can cook elaborate recipes and so on.
Mayuresh, your voice is fluctuating a little up and down, so little louder. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just increase. Is it better? Is it better?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is, I mean, as consumers, we are already exerting some kind of a feedback to the supply side. Now, whether the question is, can we modify that feedback in certain way so that we can minimize our own impact on the ocean. And this is what the consumer-based initiatives to deal with the overfishing problem. This is the basic idea they have in mind, that since fish prices and fish landings are kind of impacted by consumers directly or indirectly, can we directly or indirectly even impact fisheries practices as well? And then in the West, you can see there are several consumer-based initiatives like Seafood Watch, Ocean Wise, Fish to Fork, Sustainable Seafood Initiative, etc., etc. Basically, all of these initiatives tells you which fish to eat and which fish to avoid based on where the fish is coming from. But in the Western world or in the developed country, the rationale of such kind of recommendations are something like this: that there is a lot of fish which is imported into Western countries. So this is the US imports of fish in 2012, for example, and you can just see the number of countries which are supplying fish to US. And what this gives them is a kind of opportunity in deciding which countries have best fishing practices and which countries do not have best fishing practices, and accordingly they can label certain fish as sustainable or unsustainably caught, so that consumers can make choices according to the label. Another important thing is, in Western world or in developed world, most of the food is packaged when it is sold to retailer in the retail market. So there is a packing. There is somewhere you can put your label of sustainably caught or unsustainably caught fish, etc., etc., so that it can be viewed by consumer, and that makes sense. And so they had come up with such labels of best choice, good choice, or avoid, depending upon where the fish is coming from. Now, when something like this has to be thought in an Indian perspective, such labeling approach wouldn't work in an Indian perspective, because most of the fish which are consumed in India are caught in India. I mean, we do have some kind of demand for things like Norwegian salmon, etc., but it's very, very, very minuscule compared to what the demand is for the local fish. So labeling fish in terms of coming from countries which have good fisheries policies and bad fisheries policies, etc., wouldn't make sense. Second thing is, we don't like most of the fish eaters who are like regular fish eaters, who are not used to buying packaged, labeled products, seafood products. We like to buy fish very fresh. We like to go in such open markets, look at the fish, open its gill, check its freshness, and so on. And depend on that, we decide whether to buy fish or not. So there is no place to put a label about sustainable, unsustainable, responsible, and so on. So this is a kind of unique situation in India, which brings unique problems in certain sense, that we can't adopt what Western world is doing as it is, but we have to think of the ways which are more relevant to our places. And the most relevant kind of way is to have kind of a fishing calendar, where you tell consumers in which month which fish to eat and which month which fish to avoid. I'll just show you by a pointer. So for example, Ravas, this calendar is showing that in February, March, April, and May, and December, the Ravas should be avoided. In the rest of the times, Ravas should be eaten. And this is a major kind of concept behind our Know Your Fish calendar, which we had put together in 2017 for first time. Now, what we had to keep in mind while preparing this calendar, we prepared this calendar for West Coast per se, specifically. So we had to the main focus was identifying the spawning period or breeding periods of the fish, where fish lay a lot of eggs, and if you have fishing during that period, so this is a kind of a cartoon example to show what happens if fish are caught during their breeding period. So most fish lay eggs during a particular period. If they are caught during that period, then there are very less fish left who can reproduce, and over time there are the fish population starts declining. Now this is what it's called recruitment overfishing, and this is the one of the major reasons for overfishing all throughout the world. So this is something we thought that we could target, and we could target fish in their breeding seasons, highlight their breeding seasons, and inform consumers about their breeding seasons, so that consumers won't choose to eat fish during breeding seasons. But doing this is not very easy. I'll illustrate it with example of sea fish or kingfish, or what we call surmai. Because so step one is to find the critical period of surmai. So first of all, what we had to do while doing this is we have to define what surmai means. So surmai actually, what we have on west coast of India are basically three different species which are called as surmai. One is Scomberomorus commersens, Scomberomorus guttatus, and Scomberomorus lineolatus. When consumers go in to buy fish, they don't say that we want Scomberomorus guttatus per se. So all of these fish are called surmai, and we should have one recommendation for all these fish. So this is just a surmai example, but what we had done in our in putting together the calendar is we had classified fish according to how consumer sees the fish as. So now we know that to know the critical periods of surmai, what consumers call surmai, we have to find out critical periods of all these three fish. So then we went back to the literature and saw what are these critical periods. So these are different papers which are published for these three species. This is from our data source, and these are the months: January, February, March, April, so on. So what we had done is we have populated this based on what paper explained. What we had populated four things. S means period of spawning. J means period of high juveniles in the catch. S star means period of peak spawning, and J star means period of peak juveniles in the catch. So when we populated this available information, what we found out, as most of these three species, they breed in month of March, April, and May. So we identified this critical period as March, April, and May. So of course, surmai breeds in March, April, and May. So we can ask consumers to avoid surmai during March, April, and May. But the question is it enough? Because our fisheries is not a target-specific fisheries. We don't go to catch surmai and catch only. I mean, fishermen don't go to catch surmai and catch only surmai and come back. They catch a whole lot of other things as well. So for example, so we have to account for these collateral damage also. So the step 2 that we have taken is accounting for the collateral damage. For example, surmai is caught by either large gill nets or hook and line kind of fisheries. And with large gill net and hook and line kind of fisheries, these are so many other fish which gets caught along with your kingfish. There are barracudas, barramundis, coastal sharks, catfish, groupers, emperors, dolphin fish, yellowfin tuna, Indian salmon, which is our ravas, and wolf herring, etc. as well. So now we have to think about all breeding periods of all these guys and somehow incorporate in the recommendation of surmai. So when we looked at the breeding period of all these guys, some of their breeding periods overlap one another, And this is our same table, and this is the breeding period of surmai. And if we have to add on to breeding period of all the other fish that are caught, we found that we have to also January, February and October are the period where surmai doesn't breed, but anything which is caught along with surmai, say a fish, breeds during that time. So we have to incorporate that as well in the while giving a recommendation for surmai. So for surmai, the recommendation would be March, April, May, January, February, and October. Whereas we can prefer to have surmai during June, July, August, September, November, and December. So this is how we completed our recommendations. And this is how our recommendations look like. If you go on our website, you will see 40 plus recommendations of different fish groups, which are presented on our website, and it's completely free for anyone to use. And we actually encourage people to use these kind of recommendations. If this all is too much, if if consumers feel that it's really difficult to follow calendar all the time, etc., then I'll end my talk with 5 basic rules to how to be a responsible seafood consumer. So these are the 5 key things that one needs to remember. One is avoid sharks and groupers. Sharks and groupers are slow breeders. They mature late, and as a result, they can't. They don't have a resilience as like other fish like sardines or mackerel, etc., etc. So high amount of fishing pressure would really impact them very badly. As a result, both of these groups have been impacted very badly because of the sustained fishing pressure in last 100 years, and we can't afford to have any more fishing pressure on them. So as consumers, all we can do is we can contribute ourselves into reducing the demand of these fish by avoiding this fish altogether. So first rule is avoid sharks and groupers. Second rule is minimize shrimps and prawns. Now this is something which is close to so many people's heart. People love prawns. I love prawns. However, what happens is prawns are caught by a method called trawling, which is very destructive. As you see, this is a typical trawl catch. So, and this is typical trawl catch. Basically, was done to catch prawns. So while catching prawns, so many other fish gets caught, and they have no market value. They are just dead, and over time their populations also decrease. So there is really, the prawns themselves are not really vulnerable per se, but they are making lots and lots of other species vulnerable. And the one thing that we can do is to minimize its consumption. Now, it can be argued that these days prawns are grown in aquaculture practices, and as a result, they are not really coming from the capture fisheries or trawl nets, etc. So we can potentially eat these aquaculture prawns. It's a fascinating prospect. However, what we have to understand is the food which is given in aquaculture practices to the aquaculture prawns is either comes from the bycatch or comes from the high value catch, the fish that we would otherwise eat are given to the prawns. And these are generally low value fish. So what happens is, and the prawns is like a premium high value seafood. So what happens is the fish that is low value, that can go to other people, the economically struggling sections of the society, is actually going to something which has this economic struggling section of the society who has no access to these high value kind of food. And there is this issue of the social inequity. So for that, what we recommend now is to minimize shrimps and prawns. Other thing that one can do is eat locally. As far as we know, that if this is more of a social issue rather than ecological issue, and they both are kind of interlinked. That if you eat locally, you eat what the fishermen from small scale fishing practices are catching. Now they are really not doing active fisheries; they are doing passive fisheries. That means they are like pretty much relying on what is coming to the area that time, and such kind of fishing practices are have very less impact compared to fishing practices which are active. Active means actively seeking wherever the fish is and going and catching it. So as far as possible, if we have to minimize our impact on seafood, we have to eat locally. Then use information initiatives like Know Your Fish. Now there are two information initiatives which are available. They are calendar initiatives. One is our initiative, Know Your Fish, and one is a initiatives called In Season Fish. Both are very good. It doesn't matter which one you choose, but as long as you kind of choose seafood recommended by one of these calendars, you are doing your bit to minimize your impact on oceans per se. And fifth is make informed choices about seafood. It's important to know where the fish is coming from, how it is caught, what is its breeding period, what is its life cycle, etc., etc. So ask lots and lots of questions, and these are the and ask lots and lots of questions and take that information, consider that information to have informed choices. So these are the 5 simple things that one can do: avoid sharks and groupers, minimize shrimps and prawns, eat locally, use information initiatives like Know Your Fish, and make informed choices about seafood per se. Now, I'll end the talk here and we can have a discussion. I just would like to acknowledge my co-founders of Know Your Fish, Chetna Purushottam and Pooja Rathod. They put immense amount of work in putting together this calendar, and so many different faces. It's just a subset of what all people have really given for Know Your Fish, and these all people have given their time, expertise completely voluntarily for Know Your Fish initiative, and I'm very, very thankful to all of them. So at the end, I would like to say, enjoy your seafood responsibly, and do visit our website, knowyourfish.org.in, and use our website or our recommendations whenever you would like to have fish next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayuresh. So we have a bunch of questions already.
Sure.
If you do you want to keep this presentation more on, or so that you can go back and show some parts if in case they want, or would you want to project it later? Because
what you would like to do.
Sorry,
what you would like me to do.
If you can, no. So I would prefer putting you on the spotlight mode so that we can have direct questions.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please.
Okay.
So shall I read the questions, or?
So I'll start with the first question. I will moderate it for you. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So I'll post the first question on behalf of the audience and myself. Sure. Is that what do you think is the logic behind not eating fish during Shravan? And how scientifically valid is it now? Or in the sense, what do you think would have been the logic behind, or how functional is it even in today's day and time?
Well, logic I won't know because I frankly don't know how this tradition has started and whether there was some rationale behind it in the past and now it's kind of irrelevant, or I really don't know. What I know, however, is this is a time of monsoon. Monsoon is a difficult time for fishing practice in general, and especially in the industrial. Now we kind of have a monsoon ban also for fishing, and fishermen, especially with the big boats who are going for a longer voyages, etc., etc., they prefer not to sail in monsoon because of the bad weather. And this could be one of the the reason why there's a less fish in the market in first place. But frankly, I don't know because small scale fishing can happen in monsoon on a good day. That is one. Other thing, whether there is does it make biological sense to not eat fish in Shravan? So, so the thing is, different fish breeds in different times. Some fish breeding period coincides with Shravan. So for those fish, it makes sense. For other fish, it doesn't make sense. Now, Know Your Fish has 44 seafood recommendations, for example, so 44 fish groups and some 70 odd species. What we have observed is only 13 species which breed in this time. So, it's helping 13 those species, but not helping others. So, so
small benefits in that way. Because typically what happens is that people argue that, oh, fish are breeding and if we eat during the egg phase. So that's what we found through your presentation as well as on the site, that that's not always 100% true.
Correct. And so, of course, it's not true that all fish breed in monsoon. That is not true. All fish don't breed in monsoon. So don't take this Shravan thing very literally. Basically, yeah.
Okay. Now there are some really interesting questions which have come up. I'll take them one by one.
Sure.
So first is by Rahul Palekar. He said there's a popular documentary, Seaspiracy, which mentions that the sustainability caught label on the packaging is based on an observer from the certifying organization traveling with the fishing vehicle to see the methods that are used. But often these observers are bribed or threatened with harm if they don't certify. So this puts the sustainability caught label under doubt. What is your thoughts on this?
So first of all, I think he is mixed in understanding what is the practice of sustainably caught and what is the practice of having observer on the boat. So having observer on the for example, many developed countries, especially EU and US, has something called as catch quotas, which means you are allowed to catch only certain fish. And in those circumstances, the government or fisheries department put an observer on a vessel to make sure that the quota is not violated. And those observers have been harassed, killed, etc., etc. When it comes to sustainably caught label, there are some organizations who would like to have this kind of sustainably caught label because they also would like to minimize their impact of fishing that has on the oceans, etc. the way this labeling works is an organization approaches fishermen and asks them what kind of fishing method that you use, what you do if there's a dolphin in your catch or if a whale is in your catch and so on. And it's like on honor base. So the thing is, most of these organizations don't really have their eyes on the water. I don't know whether they can have their eyes on the water also, because I don't know what are the legalities of it. It will change from country to country. But having said that, so in a way, after their initial monitoring, what Seaspiracy is rightly pointing out in certain sense, that after the initial monitoring, there are no further rounds of monitoring which are kind of required. And the label shouldn't be one time, but it shouldn't be continuously monitored. And this is Seaspiracy has very rightly have pointed it out. But I don't know whether the organizations would. I mean, I don't know any organization who actually send a watcher on the boat. That's what governments do. So there is a bit of a confusion that Rahul have between the observer thing and the organization thing. Yeah.
There's another question by him again. That what are your thoughts on fish farming? Is it better or worse than commercial fishing?
So at the moment, fish farming, aquaculture, etc., is considered as
or prawn farming also. If I can add prawn farming to that whole picture.
Yeah, any seafood farming for that matter. At the moment, it's been promoted on a very big scale, and it's considered as a solution to all the problems of the capture fisheries per se. And it can be the solution of all the problems of the capture fisheries. The thing is this: at the moment, the main problem is there are two problems. One is the ecological problem, and one is a social problem. The ecological problem is this: that you need to feed that whatever farm thing something, and at the moment, most of that food is coming from the either low value catch of the fisheries sector, or the catch which is targeting such fish farms. So going in for fishing to catch fish, to feed fish in certain sense. And lots of low value fish like sardines and mackerel are caught in such kind of methods. So one thing is, it is not really substituting capture fisheries. In certain way, it's subsidizing capture fisheries. So it's not really a solution. At least it's not acting these days as a solution. And second thing is, it is what fish farming or catching fish for catching fish to feed fish does is it takes low value fish which poor people would otherwise eat to grow a high value fish which rich people would eat. So then there is an issue when it comes to social equity and so on. So at the moment, aquaculture is not doing what it's claimed to do. It can do what it's claimed to do, but it requires further more research, engagement, etc., etc. Having said that, we have to admit that given our population right now, etc., etc., we have to find some solutions in aquaculture. However, how we do the aquaculture is a very big question at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is by Amruta, which is also quite interesting. That if the fish species is already being sold in the market, how do you convince consumers to not buy it? In the sense that how does one influence ancestral dietary habits?
So I didn't understand this question.
Like you said that reduce, like avoid prawns or things like that,
Yeah,
things which are sort of ingrained into the culture of the thing, that for this puja you need mahasir, or for this puja you need, like Ashtami or Durga Puja, you have hilsa which is eaten. Now hilsa in Padma River in Bangladesh is a endangered species.
okay.
So how do you kind of
Oh,
change the
so
mindset for such things?
see, the thing is, the mindset changing is coming from the information itself. Now, we can't force people to say, uh, to follow the calendar per se. And it's not right also to force people to follow the calendars per se. Uh, Ultimately, I mean, it's people have, see, the thing is, our job as a scientists is to provide the data, is to provide, in certain sense, what is happening to the fish and how we can prevent it. Um, it's up to people to take it up, and we'll promote it also in certain sense. The best convincing that I could think of is, I mean, what's the use of tradition if the fish which is required for tradition is not there? So, I mean, that is the best way to. I mean, I don't know whether that's the best way, but that is something that I can think of on top of my head to convince people. Yeah.
Okay. There's another interesting question from Amol, is that since most of the fishes available in the fish markets are from big boats, how
Mhm.
can one know which ones are the locally caught ones?
One can't, and that's why we can't go for this labeling kind of approach. We have to rely on calendar kind of approach. We have to rely on stuff like that. If as long as the fish is caught on the west coast of India, or as long as the fish is caught in the Indian waters and it's coming in your plate, the calendar is applicable to it. So, I mean, we had to make sure um, that the calendar is not relying on certain kind of fisheries practices. It has to be indifferent from the fisheries practices, because the reason why what he's saying, that you can't really tell the fish is in your plate is coming from the big boat and or not, or the small thing. What one can do is, when I said you have to eat locally, what one can do maybe is, in Mumbai there are so many small scale fishermen that they they are limited by their horsepower, how far they can go and catch the fish, etc., etc. Now, if you have a choice, if you are staying somewhere, say for example, you're saying staying in Warsaw, if you have a choice between going to the landing site and buy a fish and ordering fish online, one would prefer going to the landing site and buy a fish, because at least you would know that where your fish is coming from. But yeah, it's not. I mean, many times in cities like Mumbai, it's not practical to seek local fish all the time. But what in other places, one can certainly seek
So
local.
Mayuresh, if I can add and question also,
Mhm,
suppose you are at Malvan,
mhm,
and or many places have got, like, there is a regular auction that happens at
mhm,
certain
mhm,
landing sites. So
mhm.
would you be able to say that these are more locally caught fish? Uh, like if you go to the Malvan jetty, Malvan
Auction.
auction,
So
will those
auction.
auctioned fish be at procured locally, or would they go into deep oceans? They would go into Karnataka and Gujarat and come and sell at Malvan. How would it be?
So the thing is, you get both kind of fish in the jetty. Auction gives you opportunity in a way that many times. So for you give a Malvan example, in Malvan, the gill netters choose to land in the morning, and trawl owners choose to land in the evening. Now, if you, I mean, if that simple kind of local knowledge is available, that who is landing when and how far gill netters can really go. Malvan gill netters can't go very far. They don't go beyond, say, maximum 100 kilometers. But the trips beyond that are very rare. So in such case, you are kind of sure that the fish that you are buying from those people is local. Trawl owners is, of course, they go all the way. Fortunately, Maharashtra has kind of a cap on the horsepower of the trawler itself. So in Maharashtra, the trawlers have their inherent cap on how far they can go and get the fish and so on. So it's more likely that in Maharashtra, the catch what you are getting is actually caught from Maharashtra or maximum Goa or North Karnataka, not beyond that. But same thing can't be applied in other places. Yeah.
Right.
But
I think that's the next question that Madhura Nifadkar has asked. She said, "It's Mayuresh, nice talk. How can one decide about eating locally acquired fish when most times in the market we are not able to get that information, and there is a large amount of movement of fish due to excellent cold storage facilities? For example, in Goa, in spite of monsoon ban, we get fish from Andhra and Tamil Nadu who do not have that ban at the time. And I think same has started to happen in Konkan also. Earlier during the monsoons, usually Konkan used to not get fish in the markets. Now, because of the cold storage facilities and transportation, you get ravas, you get all sorts of rohu, katla coming into the into the fish market throughout the year. So there were certain fishes which are found at some points, but now they're coming from other places. So how does this mobility affect?
Okay, so the mobility is there, and it was there in the past. It's not really a new phenomena.
Okay.
Which has happened in past. It wasn't very strong because of the octroi rules. But since the GST rules have come, the mobility has become, really possible when it comes to taking fish from the East Coast to West Coast, West Coast to East Coast, so on. If one really wants to find whether, if one really wants to consume locally in certain sense, what one can do is, and in Goa, it's very much possible. Go to nearest small landing site, see what kind of fish is getting landed there. And if that is not the, and if suppose Bangla is not getting landed there, but you are still getting Bangla in the market, it's most likely it's coming from somewhere else. Then you have to make a choice whether to choose Bangla or not, whether it's coming from East Coast or West Coast. So fortunately, if we really look at East Coast and West Coast recommendations, there is not much difference. There is around 30% difference in terms of that fish which we can eat. Breeding season on West Coast and East Coast and so on, but it's not much difference. So the calendar largely holds true. Also, so in that way, there is some protection kind of is given. Hello. Hello.
Yes,
Hello?
sir, you're audible.
Yeah. Yeah, Madhura. So I think I have answered your question. You want to say anything further? Can you?
Sorry, Mayuresh. Yeah. No. So that's great. So there is a good like Sanjeev Nayak has asked a very interesting question that while we are talking about local responsible consumption, major contribution of the exploitative fishing comes from export market and foreign exchange revenues that they are getting. So the smaller fisher folks are not really benefited by this. It's largely the big companies who are profiting from exploiting the marine resources. So how do we stem that? How do we address this?
So the thing is, I tried to really dig deep into finding what is the contribution of India. What is the contribution of Indian catch in terms of how much of Indian catch is going to outside the country and how much it's consumed locally. So at the moment, I haven't found something which is reliable. in terms of how much how much of our catch is going locally, is consumed locally, and how much is going outside. And the reason why I couldn't find anything reliable is because the capture fisheries and the aquaculture fisheries is kind of mixed when it gets exported. So there is no different royalties for these kind of fish. So at the moment, it's kind of difficult to answer that question in the sense, see, for example, if there is not much catch going outside, then I would have said that don't bother. Most of the fish which is caught in India is consumed in India. So it's largely relevant. If most of the fish is going outside and very little amount of fish is consumed locally, then we shouldn't bother putting up the calendar in first place. So because it doesn't make sense, because the consumer is not local, it's somewhere else.
But also, Mayuresh, we also see that we tend to replicate behaviors which other countries, if something is very popular in another country with sushi coming in and this coming in, we tend to try and replicate the dietary habits or the good and bad. Like a funda like Know Your Fish or In Season Fish was something that came from America. I remember 15 years ago there were on the tables that used to be suggested fishes or do eat, don't eat kind of thing. So I think the good and the bad does tend to come from other regions. So if it's something becomes popular in that area, it might eventually come back to our platter in that manner. So I think I would definitely say that
the question is not about that. The question is about that I don't know. The question is about export, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And to answer your question, I mean, just because some concept is Western, that doesn't make it condemnable.
Yeah, exactly.
So if it works for us, well. If it doesn't work for us, then we have to find the ways to work for it.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll take the next question.
Yeah,
sure. Take a sip of water. Are you okay?
No,
yeah. Okay. So are there any identified invasive species in Indian waters that can be brought to the platter to help local fish population replenish? And I will add to this that is there a risk in doing that? Also, because then maybe the invasive fish also might become, people might start rearing them more to make them edible.
Yeah.
So
as far as
take a sip of water, then you can continue. Yeah.
So as far as marine realm is concerned, there are not many invasives that we have found. But in inland fisheries, that's completely other story. It's filled with invasives. So it's hard to find local fish sometimes. Yeah. So and it's a big problem. They are on the platter. They have brought in India to be on the platter. So in certain sense.
So tilapia, etc.
The cultured fish, etc. So I don't know whether I mean maybe the answer lies in not consuming them rather than consuming them. I don't know, but the thing is, some of these fish, for that matter, are now breeding in the wild, and so even any kind of, I don't know how much we can do anything about it, for that matter. When it comes to the inland fisheries, it's a huge problem. All sorts of invasives. We have papus, we have piranhas, we have all sorts of fish, and they are all in our waters, and it's a difficult issue. But as far as marine fisheries is concerned, we don't have many invasives. We might have a lot of seaweed invasives in future because it's been promoted very, very, very strongly. The algae like Kappa-Fagus, etc., are proposed to be grown in the places where they never used to occur. And the vegetation sense that might cause a problem in the future. At the moment, it's not as big. But yeah. But at the inland fishery is a huge problem. And I don't know, and I can't think of any way to deal with it.
So my question is that are you all thinking of including, like in Know Your Fish, are you all planning, like currently you all are focused more towards marine fisheries? Are you all considering inland fisheries and adding them into your Know Your Fish calendars, or
It's going to be very complicated. It's not our cup of tea.
okay,
It would have all sorts of biologies which has to be considered, like catchment area and endemism and all sorts of things. So it's really, I mean, really out of scope for us. If somebody wants to try it, we can help them in telling how we did this. But beyond that, and to be very frank, I mean, the Know Your Fish initiative itself, there's a lot to be done with the propagation of the initiative itself,
right.
rather than getting into something new. So I don't think, we are going to get into anything new. Yeah.
Great. So the next question is that regarding aquaculture or fish farming, it is more like monoculture of specific species, thereby hampering the rich biodiversity of that area. And I understand it has a lot of environmental impact, like leaching in nearby soil and water when done inland. Also, high use of antibiotics in these concentrated fish farms. So, aquaculture does have its own, like even rice paddy field and all also gets affected by
absolutely
prawn farms.
Absolutely. I mean, they have its whole range of issues. I just spoke of aquaculture in light of it's being seen as the solution to our fisheries problem. So it's certainly not the solution to our fisheries. Yeah.
Another question by Rahul is that in your experience, how are the current policies in terms of sustainable fishing? How difficult is it to influence policy maker decisions in this field? Are policy makers willing to listen and tighten restrictions where necessary?
Okay, so I'll have to take this one by one. So the first question is what? Are there any policies on sustainable fisheries?
How are the policies? In the sense, how do you think are the current policies? Are they good? Are they need to be tightened?
At the moment, there is a recognition that fisheries in India is overfished, and someone should do something about it. There is a promotion, or there is the states are encouraged to have the regulations per se, or different regulations in terms of mesh size, seasonal restrictions, gear restrictions, so on, which might work. However, there is no effort from the incentive ends. So the subsidies which would have which were coming to the fisheries haven't been reduced. The kind of money which was spent for going further, catching more fish, hasn't been reduced. So so at the moment, clearly policy is not doing enough. Policy is recognizing it. But the policy is not doing enough anything about it. What was the another question? Sorry.
The other question was, how difficult is it to influence policymakers? Are they willing to listen in case of tightening of restrictions? Where is it? So I would say, in terms of, let's say, the Wildlife Protection Act, how many of the marine fishes, edible fishes, are in the act? If I can add to that.
So,
and do you think some need to be added to that list?
So Wildlife Protection Act doesn't have any edible fishes. When it comes to fisheries policy per se, first of all, we have to recognize that fisheries is a state subject. That means there are two fronts of policy. One is center and one is state. If fisheries has to be relevant to its biology, the center states have to have a good dialogue, and the states also should talk with each other when it comes to fisheries policy, which is at the moment very difficult. But if you take individual cases, the individual cases are possible. So, for example, I shown you the regulation of Bitra, where it was taken to the local authority, and then and then the fisheries, the floating reserve was on paper, and that is certainly possible. So if you approach individual states with some specific recommendations about some regulations, they are, I mean, they will be willing to incorporate it into their mandate, because regulating territorial waters is a state mandate, and that is something, I mean, one can potentially attempt also. Regulating waters beyond territorial waters, which is what we call EEZ, it's a center game. It's basically comes under central influence, and then it clashes between center regulations and center policies for fisheries, etc. So that is a bit more difficult. So individual state, case by case, locally relevant regulations are possible. Nationally relevant regulations are difficult. Yeah. What was the third question? Sorry.
No, so how easy is it to tighten it up in case?
Yeah, so it's easy case by case with individual states.
Right.
It's difficult for a larger policy.
Right.
Yeah.
Another question by Amruta. Which are the sustainable methods of fishing according to
Nothing.
you? So gears or boats, or what would be considered as sustainable method? Like what?
So the thing is, this idea of sustainability is a very funny one, because idea of sustainability is always I mean, we are more inclined to associate sustainability with some kind of a method. But if that method is used for 1,000 boats, it doesn't become, I mean, doesn't remain sustainable. So sustainability is a method plus scale. So some methods in some scale are sustainable. So when you go beyond that scale, you go into the unsustainable territory. So for example, trawling in a very small scale is also sustainable.
Right.
So it's not really method based, it's scale based. It's dependent. I mean, it should be viewed as how much fish actually is getting caught and brought to the ocean, brought to the shore, rather than which method is catching that fish. Of course, there are some methods which are very target specific, which catch only one kind of fish over other. So pole and line fisheries in Lakshadweep for that matter, which is very target specific. But I mean, it's target specific at the moment, and it's sustainable at the moment because it's at that small scale. It's because there are only 100 fishermen doing pole and line. If there are 1,000 fishermen doing same method, then it won't remain sustainable. So yeah.
Okay. Next question by Sayantan Das. Given the current situation of fish stocks in India, how profitable would fish production be within the Niti Aayog's recently drafted blue economy policy, especially with respect to deep sea fishing?
Come again? Sorry.
So the new Niti Aayog has drafted the new blue economy policy. So given under that circumstances, how profitable would it be to do deep marine sea fishing?
See, the thing is profitable. So the question here is profitable for whom? If there is a big corporation which is investing in fisheries, getting a good big vessel which can go and fish in EEZ beyond territorial waters, then yes, it's extremely profitable. But here the profits are going to individuals and not the bigger community which is on the coast, which can't really go that far. So yeah, I mean, and these Niti Aayog, not just Niti Aayog, but current fisheries policies, etc., as well, are even promoting fisheries outside our exclusive economic zone. That means in international waters, in Antarctic waters, etc., etc. So if you have capital to put together that kind of fisheries, of course, I mean, in early days, it would be profitable. But first of all, the profitability won't last. And secondly, it's, I mean,
So Santan has added profitability means would it add to the government revenue?
It will definitely add to government revenue if it is taxed and so on.
Yes.
But yeah, but I mean, what should be the goal of a sector is a question to ask.
Okay.
Whether earning revenue itself can be a goal, or I mean,
And the next one is cage fishing in coastal India and in the island territories a viable option of fish production? And is it an environmentally sound practice?
I don't know much about how cage fisheries. You mean fish are grown in cage like that? Cage fisheries. So
Yes.
again, it might see the thing is all these new kind of what they call ranching. This is a method which is called ranching, where sometimes wildly caught fish are brought in the cage and then they fed till they become really big, and then they are sold for very high price. Um, the question is, all these methods are very capital heavy. So the average fisherman can't afford uh, doing something like this. They also require a kind of places, what you say places, that they require a quieter bay where such things can be done. And many times these are the same places where small scale fishermen go for fishing.
Mm.
So it's some kind of a privatization of fish uh, of the
Fishing area.
fishing area, which might be profitable for that private owner, but might come under huge conflict with a whole lot of small scale fishermen.
So Mayuresh, I have one question from my side.
Yeah.
Is that like we've seen the seasonality and the life cycle that you mentioned, but there is no clear mention about what is the size that people should consume for this species. What is the that you should not eat below this size, because a lot of sharks and other things we see that like really small individuals coming in. Of course, you've said that we should avoid sharks and prawns, etc. But for other fishes, if a rohu or a katla or a whatever, what is the size that if it's below 25 centimeters, the more people say, okay, we don't want a pomfret of this size, we want a pomfret of this size, then would that also help in making it sustainable, that people wait, only look for larger individuals and not harvest out the younger sub-adult individuals?
So overfishing was viewed in two different types. One was recruitment overfishing, which I explained that you shouldn't catch no individuals who are breeding. If they are caught, there won't be enough breeding individuals next generation, and the fish population collapse. The another is called growth overfishing, which is if you kill lots and lots of juveniles, then they won't mature to adults and become
Breeding stock.
breeding stock, and as a result, we shouldn't catch them. So these are two different kind of thought processes of overfishing. Now, for a long time, this growth overfishing, that you shouldn't catch juveniles, was very dominant. In certain sense that, of course, it makes complete sense that if they grow older, they can't grow older and then they can't breed and so on. But some of the fecundity of some of the fish is so high. So the impact of juvenile fisheries is not as much as we used to think that it is. And so now these days there is a new concept which is coming forward, called balanced harvest theory, which basically argues that you should have some juveniles, some adults, some very big fish, and so on. So you should eat in all scales. And this kind of theory is, there are arguments on both sides. There are evidences on both sides. So it's a hot topic of debate at the moment in the fisheries circle. But what it certainly has pointed out is killing juveniles is not as bad as we would like to think. So, however, it is very bad for certain species especially like sharks, like case selective species, like sharks and groupers who have fewer juveniles to begin with. And in that case, for them, it's very bad. For you certainly shouldn't eat juvenile shark or juvenile grouper, etc. Shouldn't eat sharks and groupers at all. But for fish like mackerel or sardine, etc., juvenile fisheries is not as big problem as we would like to think. So don't get too worried about size of the fish at the moment, unless there is some new evidence says that you should be worried about it.
And like, for example, we've been going and doing, walks at Sassoon Dock, etc. And many a times we've seen things like leopard rays or a sawfish or something like that, coming and being sold.
Sawfish when you saw?
So there were pictures of it which came.
Pictures of it, yeah.
So it was a recent thing that happened. Where so.
Okay.
So point is, whatever, in the sense, there are lots of rays that we've seen, large sized, fishes which we see, and people don't know. A buyer consumer generally doesn't know whether I should pick up a kilo of that meat or no, and should I become a part of that trade cycle. A fisherman might have bought it and it's being cut right in front of, while there's a police chowki or whatever. Whether I should consume that fish, is it endangered, it's scheduled, or it's rare. So other uncommon eaten fish, these might be the common ones, but also does that also add, or are there any keystone species that might be something that should not be should not come into a plate, because there are species which are slowly now finding their place into our plates also.
So you're asking, are there any keystone species?
Yeah, or are there any of these highlight species that people should absolutely, if there is that being sold, just it should, more and more people say, no, we don't want it. The fishermen eventually will also come to know.
No, sharks and groupers definitely. But apart from that, the thing is, to understand what is keystone, we should understand a lot of biology and ecology. Now, for most of the commercial fish, we means the scientific community itself. We really have a very rudimentary knowledge of their biology and ecology. So, who are keystone in what situation, we should consider everything as a keystone.
But skates and rays, etc., manta, skates, rays, these kinds of fishes, coming into the.
I mean, there are high trophic level species which are, which have internal fertilization. So the kind of biology makes them vulnerable. So of course we shouldn't eat sharks and rays, but not particularly because they are keystone or anything, but they can't cope up with the kind of fishing pressure we have these days. Yeah, that's simple as that. Okay.
So there's another interesting question by Sanjeev Naik saying, it's also now known that because of air pollution into oceans and water systems, the fishes are becoming more toxic, having more toxic elements like mercury, microplastics, etc. So they may not be healthy to consume. So I would add to this, even the filter feeders, your crabs and your prawns, things which. So how does that work, in terms of health?
So health, we see, the thing is, if we consume low trophic level species, we are more prone to bacterial infections, like salmonellosis, etc. If we consume high trophic level species, we are more prone to heavy metals and such things. So at the moment, you just have to choose your poison. In Mumbai kind of areas, there is not very healthy thing that you are going to find anyway. In maybe remote rural areas, things would be much healthier. But of course, there is no monitoring per se of this. So, what one can say about it.
So, any more questions or? I had just one more question. That what are the ways in which the audience can participate, or is there a way to contribute information, or do you all have any questionnaires or something, or that people can give you data like?
One simple thing that we have done these days. So sometimes some people used to ask us that you mentioned that this fish doesn't breed in this season, but I saw a fish with eggs.
Yeah.
And and that could be because of several reasons. One is we don't. We are kind of limited by the data that is there out there. So our recommendations can be only that good. So initially we used to give that kind of a answer, but then we thought, why don't we collect the information itself? Because if there is substantial discrepancy between what our recommendation is saying and what people are observing on the field, it's a problem. So we have a citizen science portal. On the Know Your Fish website also, it's very evident, it's right there. Where if you find eggs in the fish that you have bought, etc., you can just report it. So I would encourage all the participants to see if the next time when they buy fish, if they find eggs, please report on the portal, because this is a knowledge base that we have to build ourselves to be more relevant in terms of our recommendations.
So like Mr. Naik was saying that he's given up seafood consumption because of it, and that could be the most sustainable option. I would like to point out that there are a large number of fishing communities and people who are dependent on their livelihoods with the sea food that we consume. So if we make them also unemployed, it is going to be a huge disaster in so many other in that way as well. We have to consider that these are hundreds and thousands of year old traditional systems that are there. They shifting to blue collar or white collar job. Land is restricted, it's just 20-21%, and we have 70% of the ocean. But so shifting to land based food systems, we probably can have an entire debate and discussion separately on whether there are studies being done about how we cannot feed the population just based on land based food. So that might have its own repercussions on the terrestrial ecosystems and the species on the land. So yeah, I think less is more in this case. Maybe your whatever Wednesdays and Fridays, you can just come down to a Wednesday once a week, or as he mentioned, give up on certain groups of creatures, the upper trophic level species that are there. Anything else you would like to add, Mayuresh?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I think I got some echo. Anyway, so for at the moment, if an individual gives seafood altogether, it's the best. Maybe it's the best thing for ocean, for individual's point of view. But I don't know whether population should give away seafood per se, because a lot of things that you have said, that there are ecological problems. That means where the part which was occupied by seafood, where that part is going to come from. Will it come from land? Then what it means to grow equivalent of proteins which are coming from the sea on the land, and for that how much land would be required, and so on. So that kind of ecological questions are there. Then the questions of livelihood are certainly there, that that lots of people's livelihoods are dependent on it. Questions of culture also become evident in many communities. Fish eating is an integral part of the culture, and so on. Even question of agency comes, that who is telling whom to give up what, also comes. So these are complex answers, and I don't think so the thing is, if I have to imagine a perfectly run world where it's as ecologically responsible as it possible, etc., etc., And if somebody asks me, in that world, is there a place for fishing? Then there is. But I mean, what kind of fishing, etc., is the question. Yeah.
So if we don't have any more questions, I would like to thank Mayuresh. Yeah.
If people want to ask by unmuting, that also would be
Yes.
fine.
Yeah. Anybody that's also possible. Sorry, I think that somebody had put up their hand. I'm sorry because there were so many typed questions. I waited for that and I missed.
Sure. Madhura wanted to say something, no?
Yeah, Madhura, we can continue. I can unmute you and you can ask that question directly. 1 second. Where is unmute? I can't unmute her for some reason.
Okay, anyway, if
Yeah.
somebody wants to.
Right. Okay. So thank you so much. It was very enlightening. And by the way, Dr. Nandini Deshmukh is also there in the audience. So thanks, ma'am, also for joining us today in the discussion in the event. Ma'am, would you like to add any points or anything?
Yeah. Actually, congratulations to Mayuresh for working a lot on this particular aspect of very lesser known knowledge about fish. But I would also say that this knowledge has to go to fisherman community and making them more aware about what sustainable practices they are catching is most important, because most of the talks go with the learned people and it doesn't reach to that particular core of society who are actually making a lot of change to the entire ocean. And another point I wanted to make is living fish or stopping to eat fish is not a sustainable option, because as far as ecologies of oceans are concerned, we have to eat fish and the stock has to be replenished. But by regulation of mesh size and by regulation of fishing seasons, I think we can protect fish. In addition to this, the climate change is another very disastrous thing for the migration of fish, and that also you could address in your further deliberations, like what is happening to the Bombay duck, which is migrating to Gujarat, and the entire Bombay duck fishery is suffering in Maharashtra. So climate change is another aspect which is also creating a lot of problem about sustainability of fishing. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you want me to respond, Anand?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So, yeah, climate change is certainly a big driver, and the thing is, one would have, if something has to be done about it, one has to understand it better. And I don't know whether so there are lots and lots of studies which are coming in about climate change issues and how to incorporate them into initiatives such as this. And if there is something which is which is clear enough and which can be incorporated in initiatives like Know Your Fish, we will certainly do. So that is one. Other thing about taking knowledge of fishermen, of course, it's very, very important. However, there's we get this question a lot, especially when this is a consumer initiative per se. When we talk about consumers making responsible choices about seafood and so on, people invariably ask, but tell fishermen, they are the ones who are catching fish. They are just eating it in a certain sense. So, there are 2-3 level answers that I would like to give. One is, your question is not like that, but I could take this opportunity to give the answer.
Yeah, actually, I did not ask question. I just gave suggestion, because there
Correct,
should be personnel to be
correct,
with fishermen,
correct.
and
So,
that
but
is
yeah,
lacking at
correct. But since you have brought this topic, I would like to share my thoughts. So one thing is consumer initiative per se. It's just one of the many things that have been done for addressing the overfishing. There are lots of other things which are done as well in terms of regulations, in terms of policies, in terms of having fishermen cooperatives, etc., etc. And they are all extremely important, and we are involved in many of them as well. It,
Mhm.
it was just not the question of the topic of the day, so we chose to keep them out in
Okay.
certain sense. That
Okay.
is,
There's a
so
lot
that
of
is,
study as well as outreach
yeah,
work that you'll have done with communities, fishing communities, as well
yeah,
as, yeah.
yeah.
So,
So,
yeah.
so that is, I mean, there is a whole body of work which whole body of people are doing, uh, which working with fishermen and so on. I mean, I could have brought this up maybe, but this wasn't the topic of the day, and I couldn't have brought it up.
Yeah.
Second thing is, see, overfishing. When in our stocks, our fishery stocks started showing no growth from late 90s. It's 20 years
Mm.
from now. It's it's a kind of business which in economic sense they call it it has a marginal gains. That means the profit margin is not very high.
Mhm.
And in certain cases, what kind of fisheries are there in today on the ground is kind of a product of past policies and past regulations, recommendations, etc., etc., etc.
Mm.
So the question is, how much agency do fishermen have to actually change their practice? It's a tough question to ask. So
Mm.
for that matter, they have a bit of an agency in terms of, see, for example, a typical gill netter would have 3-4 different kinds of nets. So the gill
Mm.
netter would have an agency in terms of choosing which net to fish from.
Mm.
But if the gill netter doesn't have an agency or doesn't have a luxury not to fish in a certain season and fish in certain other season, and so on. So the kind of, I mean, the kind of agency that fishermen have is kind of limited. And
Mm.
sometimes, as consumers, we can moderate that agency in certain sense. So, for
Yes.
example, if there are 3 kinds of nets which are catching 3 kinds of fish, and one of them is in the breeding season, if
Mm.
consumers are not choosing that fish over other fish, there is no reason for fishermen to go and catch it.
Mm.
So, I mean, the of course the onus is on fishermen to be mindful about how they're doing a fishing practice, but that doesn't take the onus away from us as consumers. So,
Yes.
and we have to also realize that fishermen are at the moment, majority of the fishermen are working with very marginal profits. They are intertwined with loans and to the middleman and to subsidies from the government, etc. They are
Yes.
heavily
Yes.
dependent on such things, and I
Mm.
don't know how much they are in the position to make choices. So
Mm.
I would like to just highlight this point that yes, there is some limited agency with fishermen, but there's not too much. But
Mhm.
we as a consumer have far more agency because we are the people who can make choices about what we eat and what we don't eat. So
Yeah.
in that sense, we have to recognize. I mean, how much fishermen can actually do about it. So, for example, we done a survey in Maharashtra, and 30% of trawl owners said explicitly that the trawling is the biggest cause of overfishing.
Yes, that
And
is
they
true.
can't come out of trawling because of this circle of subsidizing and getting just repaying loans, etc., etc.
Mhm.
So it's not a trivial issue per se. It's a complex issue, uh,
Mhm.
and saying that it's all fishermen's responsibility or it's all scientists' responsibility or it's all policymakers' responsibility, we don't have a luxury to do that anymore.
But I think these kinds of
Yeah.
dialogues and
Yeah.
more discussions.
Yeah.
There are other resources also on their website that I can highlight that means. And I think each of us, if we can put this up, if we can put Know Your Fish as a screenshot or whatever on it, and that we attended this session like this, and please go and have a look and get educated. I think that is more important, that more fish consumers and even non-consumers of fish can start getting educated about it, because there is a lot of I'm seeing more and more that there is a lot of animosity or ill feeling about traditional diets that are there, which had meat or had fish, other things which are coming into the picture, and that will impact a lot more systems. So I think we need to take a more holistic picture with the communities, with policies, and with resources available in the whether it's terrestrial or the oceanic environment. And as ma'am pointed out, that climate change, I think, is an important discussion. So I would just like to announce that on November 12th, 13th, and 14th, we are hosting the second International Sustainability Conference. It's going to be online, and we will be sending more details to everybody. But some of these discussions of sustainable food is going to be a part of the conference also. So both Mayuresh and Nandini ma'am, I will get in touch with you all separately on this. But all the participants, please look forward to our registration details. It's a free conference for 3 days, and there'll be a lot of topics that will be discussed with relation to climate change and sustainability on that.
Is there
So,
any?
I think we are good. Yeah.
You good?
Yeah. Rahul?
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Mr. Mayuresh Gangal for giving such a wonderful talk and patiently answering all the questions that were posed. I felt, and I believe everyone will agree that this was an extremely enlightening session, and the questions were rich and varied, and we all can take away a lot of information from this session. Ultimately, it is a tough choice, and there is no easy or clear cut way out, but ultimately it is in the hands of us consumers who can decide uh, how the fishing industry shapes up to our demands. So thank you, sir, and thank you everyone for attending and contributing to this talk.
Yeah. Also, one quick pointer also, on the 25th of September, we are having a very different event, which is called 100,000 Poets for Change. And we're going to have nature poetry and sort of conservation and nature poetry, which is going to be related with environment and wildlife. So we will be, of course, sending details of that as well. So once again, Mayuresh, thank you on behalf of Sprouts and for making time. And the present the this video will be available within a week on our YouTube channel, the Green Channel. So that will be definitely available for you to share and educate more people. Plus, do visit the website of Know Your Fish. They are there on Instagram as well. You can follow them for the calendars. Okay. So thank you and have a good weekend.
Thank
And
you.
responsibly eat your fish.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, ma'am. Thanks, Mayuresh.